your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look at what made headlines this past week. Lethbridge police have charged a woman with careless driving in connection with a pedestrian collision in which 3 children suffered serious injuries. Police say the 3 children were crossing a marked crosswalk on the intersection of 13th Avenue and 23rd Street in the morning of January 20th. They were then struck by a vehicle heading southbound on 23rd Avenue. The driver, 60-year-old Janice Elizabeth Madsen, stopped and remained at the scene. The children required surgery and a GoFundMe account was set up in their name, with the community contributing more than $100,000 in support for the family. They have since been released from the hospital. Madsen is charged with 3 counts each of careless driving and failing to yield to a pedestrian at a crosswalk. She is scheduled to appear in court on March the 25th. The Lethbridge Police Service has been under a major transformation since 2020, when Chief Shaheen Medizadeh began as the city's police chief. On Thursday, Medizadeh, who has more than 35 years of national and international police experience, chatted in a series talk about the key challenges he faced when he came to the institution.
Bigger challenge pieces were internally the organization was broken to the point of a lot of distrust, in-house fighting, poor leadership, and that resonated in even the performance of the department. And also there were a lot of very large public issues that I think that had gone public that had to be managed. In addition to that, when I came here within a very short time of being here, because of COVID and some of the challenges, financial challenges, our budget was cut, so we had to try to manage policing and deliver with less. I had to bring more sense of security and respect internally to the organization, working with employees. And in addition to that, externally I had to connect more with the community and also become more transparent with our citizens. Our citizens expect a police service that meets their expectations and needs.
Medizadeh began his policing career with the RCMP in 1989, and his experience includes general patrol duties, major crimes, drug and organized crime, covert operations, and national security. A group of organizations in southern Alberta has launched a new economic initiative. It is to enable success amidst U.S. tariffs, which will likely be disruptive to the provincial economy, because the Alberta government relies so heavily on oil and gas exports to the U.S. for its revenue. BCN's Heidi Echeverria has the details.
As discussions surrounding tariff intensify in both the United States and Canada, experts warn of potential economic impact on Canadian markets. In response to these challenges, Southern Alberta is taking proactive steps with the launch of the Lethbridge Region Economic Resilience Task Force. Trevor Lubington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, discusses how this new initiative is designed to bolster the region's economic resilience.
So the Business Data Lab at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce did identify Lethbridge as the 10th most vulnerable city in Canada to the impact of tariffs. And so, last year, Lethbridge exported about $2.2 billion worth of product, and that's mostly manufactured goods as well as value-added agri-food products, so it's not commodities. And 90% of all of that goes to the United States. So we're extremely vulnerable to the potential impact of tariffs. So that's why we need to come together. We've worked with 8 other community partners to bring together a coalition of the willing. So it's a number of like-minded organizations that are looking to really find solutions for industry in this region, support business. South Grow Regional Economic Development is here. We have Alberta Southwest. We've got the Lethbridge Construction Association. We've got Tourism Lethbridge. Ourselves as Economic Development Lethbridge. We've got both of our major post-secondary institutions, so the City of Lethbridge, Lethbridge County, Prairies CAN, which is Prairies Economic Development Canada, as well as the Travel Industry Association of Alberta. Yeah, interprovincial trade and advocating for removal of some of those barriers is a key part of the work. Now here's the frustration. In Canada, we've been talking about removing or reducing interprovincial trade barriers for decades. My hope is that this is finally the situation that motivates us to do something about it.
We have become over-reliant on trade with the United States. A substantial amount of the commodities coming from the rural areas are sold directly into the United States market. A lot of it, of course, is processed here and then sold on to the US too. And we've been talking for decades about diversifying our trade and our exports and the need to do that.
With tariff now in place, Southern Alberta is now focused on future challenges, mitigating potential impacts and ensuring long-term economic stability. For Bridge City News, I'm Heidi Echavarria.
After the break, more reaction to the tariffs from a national and provincial perspective. A judge has dismissed a court challenge that sought to overturn the current prorogation of Parliament. In a decision released Thursday, Federal Court Chief Justice Paul Crampton ruled that the applicants had failed to show that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had, quote, exceeded any of the limits of the Constitution when he advised the Governor General to prorogue Parliament back in January. Two Nova Scotia men represented by the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms had asked the court to declare the current prorogation illegal because there must be a reasonable justification for hitting the pause button. The judge disagreed with their arguments. U.S. President Donald Trump announced Friday that he might impose reciprocal tariffs on some Canadian goods as soon as the same day. This is the latest development in the trade war involving U.S. neighboring countries after a head-spinning week in which Trump imposed 25% tax on Mexican and Canadian goods and then delayed some of the levies for a month. Trump told reporters Friday that he would target Canadian lumber and dairy products, accusing Canada of taking advantage of American farmers by charging steep tariffs on the products coming in from the U.S. Earlier this week, however, Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc said Canada has suspended a second wave of retaliatory tariffs after Trump signed an executive order to pause some of his tariffs on Canada until April the 2nd. Trump's on-again, off-again tariff threats have strained financial markets, lowered consumer confidence, and put many businesses into uncertainty. Even with a pause, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says retaliatory tariffs will remain in place until Trump drops the levies completely, adding he expects Canada and the U.S. to be in a trade war for the foreseeable future. He made the remark a day after Trump delayed tariffs for a month for vehicles coming through the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement on Trade. Trudeau confirmed Thursday that he won't be lifting any reciprocal levies if Trump leaves any tariffs on Canada.
Focus we have right now is on reducing the impacts of the tariffs. I can confirm that we will continue to be in a trade war that was launched by the United States for the foreseeable future. So Canadians should continue to buy Canadian, continue to stand up for each other. But we are trying to reduce the areas and the impact that these tariffs that the Americans are bringing in will have on Canadian workers. But Canada will continue to stand firm and unequivocal that as long as there are tariffs on us from the United States that are completely unjustified, we will be responding strongly.
And days earlier, Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson said Ottawa is extending a tax break for those investing in critical mineral exploration. He says the 15% tax cut is being extended for 2 more years and is expected to free up $110 million to help develop mining sites, primarily in the north. Critical minerals have been a leading political issue in recent weeks after President Trump's repeated calls for Canada to become the 51st state. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was caught on a hot mic last month saying Trump's threat was a real thing tied to his administration's desire to access Canada's critical minerals. And there's also a possibility that Justin Trudeau may stay on as Prime Minister after a new leader is chosen this weekend. To talk more about this is our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who sat down with BCN's Jeanette Rocher.
It's funny you ask because Trudeau was asked about that at his news conference on the tariffs, and he said that will be a discussion between himself and whoever wins the Liberal leadership. We're all assuming it's going to be Mark Carney, and that they'll have a discussion on that. One of the things that I've heard lately is that Trudeau may stay on and allow Carney just to focus on an election campaign as Liberal leader. You know, Trudeau stay as PM. I don't know how that would work, but this is, I'm told, part of the discussion in the Prime Minister's office. I'm also hearing an election call by March 16th, so a week after the Liberal leadership. They'll call an election. Voting would happen just after Easter. So Easter is April 20th this year. Easter Monday is technically a stat holiday, according to the federal government. So bureaucrats won't be working. That means you can't hold the election that day. It's got to be April 22nd. So watch for that. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but these are some of the discussions happening in Ottawa. Is Carney just focusing on an election campaign, Trudeau remaining PM, but an election call March 16th for a voting day of April 22nd.
Okay, and then speaking of Carney, Brian, you've obviously been pointing to several examples of him not exactly telling the truth, or in your words, outright lying. So what are some of the problems, in a nutshell, that you've seen with Carney?
Yeah, you're not allowed to say that someone's lying in Parliament. So you'll often see people come up with, oh, he's not familiar with the commandments. Meaning that they're not being truthful. Look, Carney has claimed that he helped balance the budget under Paul Martin, which he didn't do. He didn't work for Paul Martin. He didn't join the federal government until 2004 when Martin was PM, and 6 years after he balanced the budget. He's taking credit for Canada's response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Stephen Harper recently wrote an open letter saying he's taking credit for Jim Flaherty's work, and Jim Flaherty is long past and not around to defend himself. He claimed that Canada sells the United States almost all of their semiconductors, the computer chips that they rely on. We're less than 1% of all sales into the United States. On and on it goes. I mean, it's resulted in people claiming that Carney was a Roman emperor, that he was the first man in space, all these things, because he keeps claiming things, claiming credit for things that aren't true. And then when it comes to moving the headquarters of Brookfield Asset Management to New York City from Toronto, he claims he had nothing to do with it, except he did. He voted as chair of the board to make the move. So Mark Carney, he's not really familiar with the truth.
The federal government is trying to secure extensions through to 2031 for its national $10 a day childcare program. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced 11 provinces and territories have agreed to extend the deals. The agreements give those jurisdictions billions of dollars to cut childcare fees for families. Alberta and Saskatchewan have not yet agreed to extensions, and Ontario has an agreement in principle with the federal government, but they have not yet signed a deal. The Prime Minister and his Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, Jenna Sudds, made the announcement from a childcare centre in the Ottawa suburb of Canada.
These investments have been historic, and the progress that we have made in just a short amount of time is truly, truly amazing. These parents have shared what it's meant to them, what it's meant to their families, their ability to get ahead, their ability to save for the future, and the ability to invest in themselves and their careers, returning to the workforce should they choose to, being able to pursue their hopes and their dreams in their careers as well. It's making a real difference. We've seen women's participation in the workforce reach all-time highs.
In other news, police say they have made more than 100 arrests and laid more than 300 charges in a major national child exploitation operation with the help of device-sniffing dogs. The announcement was part of an update from the RCMP and other police forces on a project aimed at protecting children from sexual abuse.
It's important that we don't miss devices, because missed devices means missed evidence, and missed evidence can also mean a missed victim that we would have had a chance to otherwise identify. So once the officers have completed their search, we bring in Harley, and then Harley tries to find any devices missed through scent detection. And our statistics so far in the last 2 years is in about 60% of our search warrants, Harley is finding devices that the investigators have missed.
Wow, way to go, Harley. Here in Alberta, Mounties say they have launched an investigation following a complaint regarding Alberta Health Services. Now, they won't provide any details, but the investigation follows allegations from the agency's former CEO that there was some high-level arm twisting and possible conflicts of interest and corruption. Athana Mentzelopoulos is suing the province for wrongful dismissal, saying she was fired in January for looking into the overpays on contracts with private surgical providers. Now, none of the allegations have been proven in court yet, but earlier this week, Alberta's Health Minister Adriana LaGrange defended her role in what's become known as the corrupt care scandal. She says the allegations against her are false.
I look forward to them being defended very vigorously in the statement of defense that will be coming out very shortly. I have always been a servant leader. In all of the things that I've done long before I became an MLA, long before I was a school board trustee, as a mother of 7, as an active person of faith who was involved in my church and in my community and in so many different boards and committees, et cetera, that I've been on. It has been a huge honor for me to serve the people of Central Alberta, Red Deer North in particular. And I value the trust that the Premier has put in me to get the refocusing done.
Former Chief Judge of the Provincial Court of Manitoba, Raymond E. Wyant, was appointed as the lead of the third-party investigation into the procurement processes used by the Government of Alberta and AHS. The Alberta government says another $5 million would be added to help fund food security in this year's budget if it's passed. Since 2020, the provincial government has invested more than $31 million to help food banks and community organizations support Albertans in need. Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says no family should have to choose between buying groceries and paying their bills.
But unfortunately, we know there are many Albertans across the province who are struggling to make ends meet and to put food on their tables. The people who need the support of food banks in our province may surprise you. With 1 in 4 households in Alberta experiencing food insecurity, many of these individuals are employed and earning a paycheck. These folks are our neighbors, our families, our children's classmates.
The proposed budget also dedicates $20 million for Alberta's school nutrition program to ensure no kid has to go to school on an empty stomach. And as of April the 1st, the Alberta Child Care Program will undergo significant changes, including the introduction of a provincially set daily parent fee of $15 a day for full-time early learning and care for children up to kindergarten age. The set fee applies to children who attend licensed child care centres and family day home programs during regular school hours. The monthly set fee amounts to just over $326 for full-time care and $230 per month for part-time care. The chair with Child Care Now Alberta, Susan Cake, explains how this new change will work.
All families will be paying $326.25. And so if you were paying over that, you're going to see a drop. If you were paying under that, then you were going to see an increase. And in some cases, that increase is going to be quite substantial. For Lethbridge, I mean, we're still struggling a lot with just filling spaces. Like, we're getting more spaces for all the children that are there. It would just be very beneficial if the government can actually address that and get spaces up to the number of children that we have so families can actually access them before doing this fiddling behind the scenes that they seem to be doing about making certain families pay more and certain families pay less. I don't understand what's going on because the parental subsidy is funded by provincial dollars. So getting rid of it doesn't seem as tied to the federal agreement as they're suggesting it is. And it would be great if local representatives in Lethbridge could offer some clarification on why this is the case here and not elsewhere.
Cake says the Alberta government intends to bring the $15 a day fee down to $10 a day by March 31st of 2026. And Alberta Premier Danielle Smith made the rounds on American TV news shows to defend new alcohol rules. Smith says Canada must look out for itself in this tariff war with the U.S. Smith and other premiers said that they would stop buying American alcohol and halt contracting with U.S. companies in response to tariffs. Smith says her province will need to look at selling to other markets if the U.S. keeps its tariffs in place. Smith told CNN that American producers want Alberta's raw materials to create jobs and manufacture goods. She says she'd prefer to work with the Americans on increasing the amount of product headed south. Well, tariffs are finally in effect now, and interestingly, Premier Danielle Smith, who was big on diplomacy, now says she is fully supportive of the Prime Minister's retaliatory tariffs. To talk more about this is our legislative reporter and Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. He sat down with BCN's Paul Arthur. Take a look.
Well, everything is so up in the air right now over the course of the day today. Premier Smith talking about what she was going to do in response to the tariffs. You had all these conversations going on about the United States perhaps reducing some tariffs. It's really all in flux right now. And the interesting thing is yesterday, so Tuesday, the tariffs came into effect, and you'd pretty much every premier in the country, the exceptions at being Premier Danielle Smith and I think Scott Moe of Saskatchewan as well, who immediately came out with their plans. A bunch of provinces pulled American liquor from shelves. A bunch of provinces announced income supports for businesses affected by the tariffs. You'd really sort of robust, I would say, response from the other provinces, and Alberta and Saskatchewan sort of waited their 24 hours to see where everything shook out. One of the big criticisms of Danielle Smith over the last few weeks, couple months really at this point actually, is that she's been doing all this diplomacy in the United States, talking to her counter governors in other states. She was at Mar-a-Lago a few weeks ago. There's this criticism that she was maybe sort of going rogue, not participating in this Team Canada response to things. And so it was very, very interesting to see on Tuesday when she put her statement out saying that, she fully sort of stands behind the Prime Minister. And so what gives? I mean, it's hard to say. My hunch is that there was this hope, I think, in Alberta political circles that this might be avoided. I mean, I think that hope existed in all political circles, this might be avoided. And, the rubber has hit the road, to use the cliche, and perhaps there is going to be a little bit of national unity for at least a period of time in response to these things. And especially because it is, as I say, so in flux. We don't know what's coming next. We don't know if things are going to change. We just have no idea. So and I don't think anyone has any particular insight. I mean, I don't think there's that much evidence that the Alberta government or the Ontario government has any different or better information than the federal government. So it perhaps does make sense for everyone here to sort of take a breath, take a step back, and sort of work on a unified response to this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the time of this taping, we still haven't heard yet from Trump exactly, what kind of concessions may come today. He's hinted at, perhaps some carve-outs. So, would there be a carve-out for Alberta oil? I mean, who knows, I guess, and that would probably impact the way we respond here. To what degree will these tariffs impact the provincial economy? I mean, we're hearing some dire predictions, right?
Yeah, pretty significantly. In the budget last week, the Alberta government predicted, I think it was several thousand jobs this year, and then sort of 5-digit job numbers next year and the year after. I think the number that actually leaps to my mind is 2 years down the line is 46,000 jobs lost. So we're talking tens of thousands of jobs lost over the next 2-3 years if these tariffs stick around. Of course, they're interesting projections because there's no guarantee the tariffs will stick around, right? Even if Trump doesn't back down, we have midterm elections in the United States in 2026. If things go poorly in the United States economically, really good chance the Democrats take back both houses of Congress. And tariff powers actually are a congressional power. This is actually not a executive branch power in the United States. Donald Trump is using some sort of obscure kind of emergency act stuff, and Congress could actually amend legislation and put a stop to this today, in 15 minutes from now, if they so desired. So very good chance that we're not actually looking at tariffs 3 years down the road if the Democrats take back Congress next year, if the Democrats win the next presidential election. So, but all of that is to say it could be a very painful year, 6 months, whatever. And then, of course, there's whatever spending is done to sort of weather the storm, right? If we think back to the COVID years, massive government expenditures, helping businesses, helping individuals, a lot of that federal funding, to be fair. But of course, we don't know what that's going to look like because we don't know what the final numbers are going to be. We don't know how quickly some of the markets might pivot. All very up in the air. But I mean, at the end of the day, the prediction is more or less that this is going to be bad for Alberta and bad for Canada.
Yeah, again, no one wins in a trade war. Mm-hmm. I just don't think there's a winner. But now we haven't actually had a chance to connect with you since Alberta released its budget. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the budget here, so we're talking. I think it's a $5.2 billion deficit. It's big, but now there were some tax cuts as well. So do you want to just maybe share a bit of your thoughts on the budget?
Sure, yeah. So the tax cut's a really interesting one. This was promised in 2023. The UCP had promised during the election to create a new income tax bracket below $60,000, where the tax rate would only be 8%, not 10%. This will save the average working Albertan, I think it's about $750 a year. So, the average household, perhaps $1,500 a year if you've got, sort of 2 income earners, is where the math works out on that. But it's going to cost the government about $1.2 billion, which, you just said the deficit's $5.2 billion. So it's not making up this entire deficit. But it certainly is blowing a bit of a chunk in the provincial government's budgeting. And you know what? I don't know if anyone anticipated it was going to come now. I think part of the reason why the Alberta government decided to go ahead with this now is if you can keep more money in people's pockets, that might lead to more spending. That might dampen some of the sort of recessionary effects of a trade war. But, I think that a lot of people had thought, well, the time to roll this out is actually probably 2026, 2027, right before a provincial election. So I think a bit earlier than people anticipated, both from a political, tactical side of things and also from an economic standpoint. So the big sort of top line numbers obviously are that deficit number, that $5.2 billion, the tax cut costing $1.2 billion. It's a pretty big spending budget, generally more than $70 billion. Lots of money going to cities. In particular, Edmonton is getting a huge injection of cash to do a downtown development just adjacent to the arena. An increase in education funding as well. I think about 4.5% more in education funding this year. And that's also offset by actually a pretty significant increase in the education property tax right across the province. So people will notice that on their tax bills, their property tax bills coming up. Now that's going to vary by municipality, of course. But, I think in Calgary, it's like an extra $390 or something like that for the average homeowner in Calgary. So big hits there. So you win some, you lose some in this budget, it looks like. But a very a tense budget, a budget that is making some cautious decisions. Not any really big spending cuts is the other thing that was notable here. Back in, must have been 2019, 2020, Premier Jason Kenney, they tried to sort of freeze the AISH budget. It's the insured income for the severely handicapped. Massive backlash to that. They de-indexed income tax, so it wasn't going up with inflation. Massive backlash to that. We're seeing some different decisions made this time around. And part of that, I think, is consciousness of this trade war. Part of that is consciousness that we're, believe it or not, only 2 years from an election.
Coming up after the break, we chat with Dr. Danny Leroy. He's a professor of economics at the University of Lethbridge, and he's going to talk about the impact of U.S. tariffs and how Canada's retaliatory tariffs won't help Canadians, but will actually make things more expensive. And if you're watching us online, that full interview is available on our YouTube channel.